Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to be talking about forging. In order to access the forging page you have to press F. Before I go over forging, let's go over some key definitions. To start off, let's talk about implicits. Implicits are stats that are inherent to an item and cannot be forged. For instance, this item has an implicit of 21 armor and 27% necrotic resistance. Next, we go to affixes. Affixes are the main stats to an item, and we can have up to a total of 5 affixes to an item, with up to a maximum of 2 prefixes, up to a maximum of 2 suffixes, and a seal affix. What are prefixes and suffixes? Also, the seal affix can be either a prefix or a suffix. Now, what are prefixes and suffixes? Prefixes are generally the more offensive attributes to an item, and suffixes are the more defensive attributes to an item. For instance, attunement and increased cast speed are the prefixes for this item, and endurance and armor are the suffixes to this item. Attunement and increased cast speed provide more damage, endurance and armor provides more survivability. Also, prefixes are also put on top of the suffixes in the item when you're looking at it, and they have the arrows on the left to signify that they are prefixes. The suffixes would be below the prefixes, and they would have 2 arrows on the right to signify that they are suffixes. Next, we have forging potential. When you forge an item, you use up to a maximum of 24 forging potential. So this item has 2 forging potential left. So when you upgrade an item, it shows you how much forging potential that it would cost. With 2 forging potential, when we upgrade this, we would have a high probability of not being able to forge it another time, because it only has 2 forging potential left, unless unless we are lucky and it costs only 1 forging potential. So generally, when we're upgrading affixes that are higher tier, it would use a higher forging potential when we're upgrading an item. So when we're upgrading from tier 1 to tier 2, it costs up to 10 forging potential. When we upgrade from tier 2 to tier 3, it costs up to 12 forging potential. And what are tiers? So affixes have different tiers. We have up to T7. So our attunement is at T7, increased cast speed is at tier 1, endurance is at tier 5, armor is at tier 5. So when you hover over the item, you can press Ctrl and alternate to look at the tier and the range as well if you want to look at that. But if you go to the forging page, it also shows you the tiers of the affixes. One thing to keep in mind is that the upgrade from tier 1 to tier 2 is a lot lower than when compared to tier 4 to tier 5. What I mean by that is that the percentages, for instance, the increased cast speed would only increase narrowly from tier 1 to tier 2, and it would have a wider increase from tier 4 to tier 5. So we can only forge up to tier 5. Tier 6 and tier 7 are dropped by mobs. We wouldn't be able to craft that into an item. Next, we'll talk about the crafting materials. There are 3 different types of crafting materials. Affix shards are what we use when we upgrade a specific affix. We would need the specific affix that we are upgrading. For instance, when we're upgrading cast speed, we would need cast speed affix shard. I have 249 left to be used. Next, we have modifier runes and support glyphs. These are items that modify the outcome of the craft. So I will talk about each one of them later, but each one of them have a very distinct role in crafting. With the definitions taken care of, let's go over forging. So there are 2 ways to upgrade an affix. You can simply press the up arrow and for any existing affixes, or If the item has empty affixes, you would simply press the add button and add the specific affix that you need. This item has a missing prefix, so you can add any prefix. You would have to have the associated prefix for it too, from your prefix shot that is associated with it. Next, let's go to the glyphs. We'll start with Glyph of Hope. So Glyph of Hope allows you to keep your forging potential. So what I mean by this is if you forge an item when you're upgrading, you have a 25% chance for the item to not use any forging potential when you're forging. So let's try it on intelligence. So this is a special case. We get critical success. So what critical success does is it upgrades the specific affix that you were upgrading, and it also upgrades a different it also upgrades a random affix that is within the item, and it also does not use any forging potential, and you get to keep your affix shot as well. So that's when you're upgrading, there's a chance for it to be critical success, and that is really good. Next, let's put cast speed into the item, and we'll keep our Glyph of Hope, and we'll try upgrading it. So as you can see, Glyph of Hope preserved the forging potential, and we end up not using any forging potential. We did end up using one cast speed affix shot, so that's Glyph of Hope. Let's go with Glyph of Chaos next. Before we go to Glyph of Chaos, Glyph of Hope, there's really no reason for you not to use the Glyph of Hope when upgrading unless you are using any of the other glyphs. Just to keep in mind. Right, next let's go to Glyph of Chaos. Alright. So let's say you are not using endurance for your build and you do not want endurance. So you can use Glyph of Chaos to upgrade and reroll the specific affix. So endurance is a suffix, so when we upgrade and reroll it, it would reroll to a different suffix that is possible within this item category. So let's try it. So we use forging potential, and it changes to a void resistance. And if you like it, you can keep it, or if you do not like it, you can always use Glyph of Chaos again. Let's go to Glyph of Order next. So Glyph of Order modifies the outcome of the crafting by keeping the row of the item. So when you press Control and alternate, it shows you the range of the item. So for instance, we have void resistance at 22%. We have the lowest void resistance possible for the range. So when you use a Glyph of Order on void resistance, it would upgrade it to 30%, which is the lowest of tier 5. Since it's now tier 4, when we upgrade it, 30% would be the lowest on tier 5. So let's upgrade it. So as you can see, we are still at the lowest range, which is 30% void resistance. So generally, you use Glyph of Order at tier 4 when the item has a really good roll. What I mean by that is, if void resistance was at 29% at tier 4, you would want to use this. And I was just upgrading this for the sake of it, but usually you wouldn't want to do what I have just done. Next, we have Glyph of Despair. So what Glyph of Despair does is it has a chance to seal an affix instead of upgrading it. And when you seal an affix, the affix moves to a seal slot to a different slot. So these are actually pretty rare, so you will want to use this sparingly. So for instance, we can try to seal tier 3 physical resistance. So we fail, and we fail again. So we can try to seal a tier 2 dexterity. We have a higher chance at lower tiers. So Glyph of Despair would have a much higher chance if you are at lower tiers, so you would want to use this at lower tiers if you have a undesired if you have an undesired affix. If the undesired affix is already at tier 4, you would want to use Glyph of Chaos. So let's try to seal Dexterity. We are unlucky. Let's try to seal Void Resistance. See, we're able to seal Void Resistance. There are actually multiple ways to use Glyph of Despair, and I actually use it in a very greedy way. So let's say let's say I'm using an exalted item, and I have the 4 stats that I want, and for one of the affix, when it's at tier 4, I will try to use a Glyph of Despair to try to seal it, so I can have an additional 5th affix to add onto the item. So the seal affix would be tier 4, but I would have a total of 5 affixes in the item. But it's a very greedy way of doing it because you have a very low chance of sealing the item at tier 4. The other reason why you would use Glyph of Despair is to, like I said before, to seal it so you can actually add additional, so you can have an empty space to add whatever affixes that you need. So for instance, you don't need Void Resistance at all, so you would seal it and then you add any of the other suffixes that you need. Next, we'll talk about runes. We'll start with Rune of Shattering. This is pretty simple. So you use Rune of Shattering to destroy an item, and you get the corresponding affix shards from the item. So you can only get up to a maximum of 7 attunement shards, maximum of 1 cast speed, maximum of 5 endurance shards, 5 armor shards. So what I mean by that is, it's not guaranteed that you will get all of the affix shards from the item. You have you are not guaranteed to get all of them. You can get up to a maximum. Let's try it and you see what I mean. So as you can see, I only get 1 cast speed, 2 attunement. Even though my attunement was at T7, I only get 2. I got lucky on 2 of the suffixes and I got 4 each, and I also did get the 1 mana shard from my seal affix. Next, we'll talk about Rune of Refinement. So what Rune of Refinement does, it allows you to reroll the affixes. So well, let's click Contra and Alternate. So we are now at 175% freeze rate multiplier and 10% cold resistance, 18% increased melee attack speed, and 29% critical strike avoidance. So the increased melee attack speed is at the lower end of the range. So what you want to do is you want to use a Rune of Refinement to reroll that to hopefully get a higher number. So let's try using Rune of Refinement on these glyphs. So as you can see, we improve on the increased melee attack speed, but critical strike avoidance actually rolled lower. Now it's at 25% at the lower range. The freeze rate multiplier is at 164%. So when you use Rune of Refinement, it rerolls all the affixes. So there are multiple ways to use Rune of Refinement. You can use Rune of Refinement on an item before you add the 4th affix or the 3rd affix, so you get to the maximum possible range for your affixes that are already in the item, and then you upgrade the rest of the item. Or you can use a Rune of Refinement and just gamble. You can also use Rune of Refinement for an item up to tier 4, and then so let's say if I have a T7 on a prefix and T5 on a prefix, and those 2 are very good after Rune of Refinement, you would also have the opportunity to use a Glyph of Order on the other stats that are on the item if they roll good. Next, we'll talk about Rune of Remover. So Rune of Remover, you use this if you need an affix shot, or you can use this to remove an unwanted affix in the item. So what I mean by that is when you use Rune of Remover to remove an affix, you actually get all of the shots. You do not get a random amount. So if you remove melee attack speed, you remove 6. If you remove critical strike avoidance, you remove 5. If you remove freeze rate multiplier and cold resistance, you remove 5 of that. The other way of using Rune of Removal is, let's say I have melee attack speed, critical strike avoidance. I don't like freeze rate multiplier in my item. I could try using a Rune of Removal to remove it. Notice that I can't use Glyph of Chaos anymore or Glyph of Despair anymore on this item, so I would try to use a Rune of Removal to remove it. So we got unlucky and we removed the exalted affix. We removed the T6 affix, but notice we get all 6 back instead of a random amount. So also Rune of Removal does take forging potential, so you would not I mean the Glyph of Hope preserve our forging potential this time, but it does use forging potential, so you wouldn't be able to use Glyph of Rune of Removal on an item that has 0 forging potential. In that case, you would always have to use Rune of Shattering. So Rune of Discovery adds random tier 1 affixes to all empty affix slots. It has an increased chance of rolling rarer affixes, but I don't really use this. The reason for that is because it rolls random tier 1 affixes and it is pretty bad, unless maybe if you're leveling it might be good, but at endgame you really want to be able to add whatever affix that you need. So let's try using Rune of Discovery. So we got mana and chance to shred armor on hit. It does not cause any forging potential, but like I mentioned before, when you add a certain affix to the item, it actually causes a lot of forging potential. So you could use a Rune of Discovery so that it doesn't use any forging potential. Sometimes you have to use Rune of Discovery anyways because you might end up not having enough forging potential, but that's the tricky part about forging. I mean, it's kind of based on luck because sometimes you use a lot of forging potential, sometimes you do not use forging potential when you're upgrading. Next, we have Rune of Shaping. So what this does is it allows you to reroll the implicits. As I mentioned earlier, the implicits are at the top of the item. This item has an implicit of 21 armor and 22% necrotic resistance. So the necrotic resistance can roll from 13 to 28. So if you use the Rune of Shaping, it would reroll the necrotic resistance. So from 22%, we reroll it to 21%. We actually roll it lower, so we got unlucky there. So how do you use Rune of Shaping? You use it only on exalted item that you're using. You don't really need to use it on any of the items that you're going to slam. I use a lot of unique or legendary gear, so I do not really use Rune of. I actually do not use a Rune of Shaping that much. So this item was one of the examples that I used Rune of. I use Rune of Shaping. I don't even remember the name because I don't really use it. So I use Rune of Shaping and I roll 14% increased cast speed. I could roll it again to try to get 15, but it's very unlikely for me to get that, so I would not do that. Next, we have Rune of Ascendance. So Rune of Ascendance would change any item to a unique or set item. It just has to be normal, exalted, rare, or magic. It cannot be a unique item or set item to begin with. And also, unique and set items do not have forging potential. Alright, with that being said, let's try ascending it. We get a 0 LP Glyphs, just use this. So you'll only use Rune of Ascendance on rings to try to get rings. That's what I am using the Rune of Ascendance for. Rune of Creation. I have 7 of this. I use a multiple of this. Rune of Creation. Usually you use this on items that you want to slam into your legendary. If you have really good stats on the item. So let's say this is not the best actually. Let's say if you want to use Rune of Creation on this, um, it would create a duplicate of this amulet and it would change the forging potential to 0. However, if the item is already at 0 forging potential, you would not be able to use Rune of Creation. So what the most practical use of Rune of Creation for my class would be if I have a relic that has +4 to Frostclaw, I would use Rune of Creation to duplicate it. But in the first place, it would need to have some forging potential left. Rune of Research, last rune. So Rune of Research allows us to seal an experimental affix. So for instance, this has 7 watt gain on kill plus 59 watt decay threshold. So we can seal that to its own slot, and we can add additional affix. We can do this for 2 reasons, so that we can again add whatever stats that we need to the item and try to slam it, or we want to use the experimental affix as an additional affix to the item. It would be really good if we have a T4 to T5 experimental affix and we seal it, and then we get an addition. We get to add an additional prefix to the item. Also, experimental affixes are only prefixes. They cannot exist as suffixes. So let's seal this. So also when we seal the an experimental affix, we have a chance to get the Glyph of Insight. Next, we go to Glyph of Insight, and this is the most tricky of them all because it allows you to change your prefix into an experimental affix, and this change is actually not random. We'll tell you about that later. But let's start with how do you identify how to increase the level of your experimental affix that you get. So first off, you would always start with at least a tier 1 experimental affix. If you are using a Glyph of Insight on an exalted item, the experimental affix would always be tier 2 or above. If you have a tier 7 prefix on top of that, you would get an additional tier. So we already have up to a tier 3 experimental affix. If your 2 suffixes are of the same tiers, you get an additional tier to your experimental affix. And if you have a seal affix that is tier 2 and above, you would get the fifth tier to your experimental affix. And like I say, the experimental affix would not be random, and it's actually determined by for Glyphs is determined by the amount of tiers that you have in the item. So we have 3 plus 3, 6 plus 7, 15, 15 plus 3, 18, 18 plus 2, 20. So for 20, we will get armor, and armor mitigation applies to damage over time. Next. Alright, next we'll talk about Glyph of Insight. So Glyph of Insight allows you to modify a prefix to an experimental prefix. So if you do not want freeze rate multiplier and you want to change it to an experimental affix, you can do it. And the experimental affix that you get is actually not random, and I will talk about that later. But before that, we'll talk about the levels of experimental affix and how it's impacted by your item. So first off, you will always get at least a tier 1 experimental affix. if you have an exalted item, you get an additional tier. So we have tier 2 experimental ethics. If you have a tier 7 prefix in your item, you will get an additional tier. We have T7 strength and we have an additional tier. So we have up to tier 3 experimental ethics now. If your two suffixes are of the same tiers, you get an additional tier to your experimental ethics. So we have up to 4 tiers on our experimental ethics. If you have a seal ethics with tier 2 or above, you will get an additional tier to your experimental ethics. And like I say, the experimental ethics is actually not random. So for instance, in this case, we have for gloves, it takes the total amount of tiers of the item to determine what type of experimental ethics that you get. So this has 3 plus 3, 6, 6 plus 7, 15, 15 plus 3, 18, 18 plus 2, 20. So at 20 total tiers, you would get, when you use Glyph of Insight, you would actually get armor, and armor also applies to damage over time. Let's try it, and it would be tier 5. Look at that. We actually get a tier 5 armor, and armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. So there's this website that I use to determine the outcome. So as you can see, the experimental ethics type is determined by the total tiers. Sorry, I was wrong on that. Actually, the total tiers is actually 18. It doesn't take the seal ethics into account. So I was wrong on that. I'm sorry about that. So when you change it to 2, 1, 2 or 1, it would be a different type of ethics. And if you just upgrade your suffix together, and you can increase the total amount of your ethics tiers. For belt, it takes the level requirement, so when you upgrade an exalted item, it increases the level requirement, so you can play around that. For boots, it's determined by the forging potential, so you would have to kind of check it, and it's kind of based on luck, right? Because you can't really change your forging potential numerically. It's kind of random. So if you are forging and you get a right amount of forging potential, you would want to use the Glyph of Insight. So to summarize, you can use your glyphs and runes however you like. You can always practice. You can actually get a lot of glyphs and runes, so you don't really have to be conservative on it, except for maybe Rune of Creation and Glyph of Despair, I would say, and maybe even Glyph of Insight. I don't really use experimental items, so I don't really use that at all. So with that being said, let's try applying our knowledge into forging, and let's try to forge this glyphs that I just bought. So I want intelligence, I want chance to apply frailty on hit, I don't want attunement. So what we want to do, we can use Glyph of Chaos to try to change it to different prefix, but we only have 34 forging potential, so if it's not what we want, we run a risk of not being able to use another Glyph of Chaos to try it again. And usually at lower tiers, you do not want to use Glyph of Chaos, you would just use a Glyph of Despair. So we'll use a Glyph of Despair. So we seal the attunement, and we only use 1 forging potential, we got lucky there. So now we can put cast speed into it. Alright, now let's say if you're a gambler and you don't want necrotic resistance, so what you want to do is use a Rune of Remover. Because you already use a seal affix, you already have a seal affix, so you wouldn't be able to change the necrotic resistance. I mean, you wouldn't be able to seal the necrotic resistance. You can use Rune of Remover to actually remove that, or you can use Glyph of Chaos to try to have the suffix to change to a better one. But let's say if I want to put chance to shred armor on hit on my suffix, it's really hard for me to use Glyph of Chaos. So we can use Rune of Removal. We have a 33% chance of success actually. If we actually remove intelligence, the item is useless. I say the item is now useless. So we can buy another one and play around again. Still do intelligence. Alright, for this video, I'm just going to buy the cheapest one. Alright, this is actually better because we actually have a free affix. Alright, so when I'm upgrading class speed, I don't really like health, right? So and I don't really like health. So what can I do is I would want to seal that first, because if you do not seal that first and you upgrade class speed and there's a chance of critical success and you upgrade health, it's going to be harder for you to seal it later. So seal that first, and now you can put class speed into your item. Let's upgrade it. Oh, we got another critical success again. That's lucky. So now at 11% increased class speed and our intelligence is at 14, we can put chance to shred armor on hit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, now as you know, I'm a really greedy person. I don't like the intelligence at 14, so I would use a Rune of Refinement. Hopefully the Glyph of Hope would save me. Nope, it doesn't save me. And the intelligence did not improve too. So I actually throw away a lot of items like this. That's why I like Merchant Guild, because I can actually keep forging, and I can actually just buy a new one and do it all over again. Let's do another one. Let's buy this. Alright, health regeneration, we do not want that, so what we want to do, Rune of Removal, and freeze rate multiplier is pretty bad too. Like I say, ideally we want to have intelligence, class speed, and chance to shred armor, right? So all three stats are useless. Let's try to use Rune of Removal. Alright, it removed the physical resistance. Ideally it would remove health regeneration, because I can actually seal the physical. I can actually seal the health regeneration. Let's do it again. Ooh, let's do it again. We are so lucky we never hit the intelligence. What are the odds of that happening? What, 25%, 33%, and 50%. So it's pretty low. Let me do some math actually. So 0.75 multiplied by 0.75 multiplied by 0.66 multiplied by 0.5. There's a 25% chance of that happening, so that's pretty good. Alright, now we can add whatever we want. Ooh, got lucky with the critical strike too. Chance to shred armor. Perfect. Now we add dodge rating. So I don't think we will be able to make it with the forging potential, and also we have to use Rune of Refinement too, so interesting. Got lucky there. Yeah, we will not be able to make it. Let's buy another one. And we already have 16 intelligence, so we don't have to use Rune of Refinement. Let's start with Rune of Removal. Ooh, got lucky there. Right, that's useless now. Let's get another one. Perfect. So this is easily sealable because for experimental ethics we can just seal it. Even though it's a tier 3, and seal it. Right now, let's go to cost speed, 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's useless again. We do not have enough forging potential again. Alright, let's try to find one that has an open prefix. That's not bad. Alright, now intelligence is at 15. Let's try Rune of Refinement and... Whew, that's terrible. That's useless now. Let's try this. Let's try Glyph of Chaos. Oh my god, we got so lucky and we get the cost speed. Look at that. That's what I mean by you just have to be confident and you will get what you want. Alright, next let's go to Rune of Refinement and we try to refine the intelligence to 16. Oh no. Now we are unlucky. So this item is useless too. But essentially that's what I do a lot. So to get what I need for my items. So for instance, this item, I did have to burn through some glyph before I get a plus 16 intelligence and plus 14% increased cast speed.